Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. So we have a lot of interesting content packed for you today. Just to give you a quick preview on that, we will start off this webinar with some market dynamics, complexities faced by the operators in the domain of network operations, right? And then followed by some interesting use cases and demos, and wrap it up with some recommendation and how we can address these issues together. First thing first, we will keep this as interactive as possible with our speakers and as well as the audience. So throw in questions that that we can address, like what Lance was pointing out in the chat window, so that it'll become as interactive as possible. With this, let's kick things off a bit about the state of the market, right? So we are well, aware of the service providers' role in today's economy. It's irrespective of fixed or mobile services. This new digital economy, it provides huge trillion-dollar opportunities, right, for service providers. However, along with these opportunities, there are also several challenges, right, that we have to address within our networks and services today. So things like adopting new technologies to transform services or transform network infrastructure and transforming the business model. And all these new innovations or transformations, puts pressure on the margin to the operators, right? And to top these off, in a recent survey conducted by a large analyst firm with over 400 service providers and their technical and infrastructure managers, they concluded that 80% of the operators indicated that, reducing operational cost is their top priority in short term. So what are the network, complexities that we can identify with our customers, right? That is delivering service level agreements, quality of experience guaranteed to your customers, which in particular, to our fixed network environments, where there are lots and lots of data that comes from the, let's say, legacy switches of DMSs or CS2Ks, or let's say records collected from switches like CS2Ks or C20s, or call controllers, SPCs, gateways, and similar, soft switches and network elements, right? And this can be all the way to the virtualized or the new NFV-based instances that you plan to deploy. All these, invariably increases the difficulty level in meeting the SLAs and QoE guaranteed to your customers, right? And yes, with our, let's say, existing standalone tools that you might have in your network like EMS or NMS and similar tools, we can use these to manage, individual network or product or services operations. But there is no overall network visibility and the advanced intelligence that we can deliver, right? Let's say for things like network planning or let's say service disruption. And all these, can't be delivered if we don't have enough end-to-end visibility into your operations, right? Which then brings in the complexity of inefficient operations, such as can we get the report that explains what is happening in the network or what happened in the past? Can we then look into these reports or stats and figure out what's coming? Can we address these security issues before it happens or in real time when it's happening in the network? And on top of all these, right, as a fixed network operator, the biggest complexity end of the day is to catch up with other fast evolving services or competitions in the market. And if, let's say, we have a proper data enrichment tool in place during the network operations and security, then we can worry less about, giving a poor service or service disruption or on situation of pandemic, like right now, capacity exhaustion, and really focus on actually rolling other key services, right, out to the market and of course, addressing the poor customer experience. And with all these challenges clubbed together, in a recent study on service providers, it has been concluded that, operators spend more than 60% of their revenue on the OpEx alone, right? And large portions of these go to managing operations and efficiency within an operator's network environment. So what is service assurance in fixed voice infrastructure, right? It is about data enrichment. It is about taking those raw data from your network, across your network, your devices and services, and turning them into KPIs or customizable key performance indicators, and deliver it in, let's say, interactive dashboards, right? That in turn you can deliver it to your customers. Let's say it could be one of your, large financial customer like a bank, or who wants to know the performance of their trunk services with you. Just a quick example, right? So when we have, all these data, that are collected and that's available within the network, then we can quickly identify trends, let's say things like poor device performance, or let's say capacity exhaustion, or proactively fix issues that may or may not, may not be known within your network. Or let's say troubleshooting issues, right? By getting to the root causes quickly, speeding up the issue remediation or issues resolution, right? And driving continuous improvements across for problems or issues that are yet to come, or those are currently happening. So in general, when we talk about service assurance and the solutions that are available in the market, they most of the time, with analytics platform, they address operations, right? Or intelligence that's delivered for operations. But it's also about security, right? For example, using automation to detect and mitigate fraud. Considering, there are several attacks we have seen in our operator customers environment, wherein the attacks came across via SIP and voice or video or IP type of real-time communication services, right? So when we talk about delivering service assurance for fixed voice network infrastructure, it has to underpin all these functionalities that you see across here, right? Which is including visibility across your network, the ability to build out and scale as your network evolves, and also offering an advanced automation or intelligence to manage the complexities that we have seen earlier, right? And all these, then can meet the demands of your customers in this complex technological and challenging regulatory environments, right? With that, let me welcome Rich and Todd. Can you take this forward and explain to us and show us how we can, deliver end-to-end visibility across the fixed voice network? Rich?
Sure, Prasanna, thank you. So if you can go ahead and into our next slide capability here. And this session is focused, so Prasanna's talking to you a lot of the complexities and stuff, what you're looking at on the data side and what you're trying to drive in the market. Where we're going to take this session here is we're going to focus on the fixed network side, and that covers everything. In particular, we're going to, with our heritage here at Ribbon, we are going to focus a lot on the class 4, class 5, that's where the use case examples are coming in. Talk about particularly around the DMSs, CS2K, C20s, but the analytic solution can expand into other types of devices, even SBCs, gateways, and such. So when you are looking at that fixed network, the things that you are kind of focused on is your areas around network modernization. Still, there are people transitioning from TDM to IP. There is network collapse because the new technology has driven the network equipment to be able to handle more and more sets of subscribers and capacity in smaller and smaller footprints. And then the other side of that is the hybridization, not just the IP transition, but when you try to make the hybrid networks and adding capabilities such as IMS into your networks, going towards that mobility side. So we are going to be pushing into these, and that's where the analytics is a very crucial point in just managing your networks so you can see and get the focus you can on equipment, the traffic, and the networks in totality. Okay. Next slide, Prasanna. Thank you. Mr. Todd?
Yeah, Rich, I mean, that's a good point, and really the first thing that kind of strikes me when you go through that previous slide is there's a lot going on there, whether it's different network access or different types of communication, and really the number of systems involved in making all of that happen. And if you think about it, the data is there. The data is there to tell us everything that we really would like to know about the network, but it is growing and growing very, very rapidly. And because of that, we need some tools in order to help us actually sift through everything that's happening and, hopefully start having the things of interest bubble to the surface. And so we're going to do that via analytics, and the Ribbon Protect platform provides the analytics solution that allows us to start sifting through gobs and gobs of data and hopefully doing something very useful with it. So we're taking things like the alarms and the reports that we've seen in the EMS and NMS platforms for years now, and we're making them much more intelligent. We're making them much more useful. And ideally, as Prasanna mentioned earlier, we're going to use this stuff to make all of ourselves much more efficient, whether it's the network or the people running the network. So can you walk us through a little bit more about what we're going to do on the fixed voice side in order to apply this analytic solution?
Sure. So what we're looking at, and a lot of the analytic stuff is dreamed out of big data. It's coming out of that aspect into the data network side, driving based upon cloud networks, and all the new technologies and complexities comes with it. But where we want to focus here is that same set of tools can be focused on the class 5 and the older types of equipment and still provide the same benefits out of it. Everything from looking at network reporting. If you realize and have a lot of history behind some of these class 4, class 5 equipment in the fixed network, the operational measurements in the documentation were measured in volumes of documentation. So just the amount of data just being spit out of these things is massive. And typically you would be looking at spreadsheets or just printouts of the information coming out and then trying to make sense of it. And this can take hours, days, and even weeks of kind of generating these reports, pulling the data out of it. When you apply an automated system with an analytics feed coming in, that data can be pulled in and you can quickly drive down to very simplistic information from that complexity, drill down to individual call levels, get aggregations from the network, ultimately driving a enhanced customer experience, get QoS information, better make decisions, be able to manage the trunk utilization, look for trunk overages, and even trying, in some of these cases, the network equipment complexity that trying to reduce how quickly you can get into problems, looking at the massive amount of traps coming in and try to boil that down to a very strategic point of what is the problem and how do we drive that forward. And then ultimately you can take that intelligent operations side and apply it with intelligent alarms, thresholds, and even use it to be able to strategically focus where you're investing in your equipment and in your network going forward. Okay. So with this, we're going to transition into some videos that we have for demonstrations, and I'm going to be walking you through some of the use cases that we are talking about here. And with this, I am going to switch over to the video. There we go. In these use cases, I'm going to be walking you through various elements hitting the C20s, hitting gateways, information coming in, and SBCs, and then covering everything from call analysis and calling number measurements to even some potential fraud scenarios, trunk group utilization, and then just traffic assessments and some log assessments based upon some failure scenarios. This dashboard deals with S&P event data. It is coming out of the GenView Manager from a C20 system, and it can show call logs, gateway events, and GenWare events. So we want to go ahead and drill down. We see this is about a day's worth of data. We do see some critical major events occurring up here in the top left. Then we can also see the events by the event type, the name of the events, the elements where the events occurred from, and then the top 20 events that occurred within that period. Prior to us doing any drill downs, we want to pause the data so it's in live mode. Then let's investigate this critical event. It happened at 4 a.m. on the 27th. So we want to go ahead and change our time bar to get to 4 a.m. narrow down the other scale. So we're looking at roughly an hour's worth of data. Okay, so but now we just see single bars. What you can do then is look at the granularity and drive it down to the minute data. Now you get a little bit better picture of what was going on over that time frame. We see that the critical event roughly started at 4:25 and lasted around 10 minutes, 3 minutes to 4:28. And then we see a bunch of clears evaluating out of the same time frame. We see if we kind of focus on this area, the majority of events around this gateway controller A304, which actually refers to a communication is down with a gateway. Okay. And we see that the majority of it is based upon the genware element itself, which would be the C20 component system. We see various other elements grouped by the event names occurring in this period. We can kind of look at that first critical period and focus in on that. And now we got into that actual event there. We see it was the genware event. We see now it was really based upon the A300 from the gateway controller. We see AMF, CMT also events occurring, and you can see those are related to it. In this case here, we now can assess and look at the details of the information and read through. Looking into the description, we can see that the actual unit is disabled. So we have a loss of connectivity with this actual unit at that gateway controller. And since it's based upon the genware element, which is the operating system where the different elements are running in the virtualized system, it's clear that this was an outage of the system that occurred affecting the genware elements and all the processes running on them. We can see here that the clear kind of came out around a huge volume of clears around this period, and we'd assess from this that that clear also will be related to the same event. And we can see that the device now had been clearing out these failed units in the communications where the gateway is down, which then the event we can defer is associated with about a 10-minute failure on the C20 coming back into service. And this actually event is related to a power outage in a lab system that we've been monitoring. In this dashboard, we're looking at data based upon AMA records or call detail records coming in from a C20. This data is collected and compiled by the analytics engine, and it provides us a quick overview of what's going on based upon the call detail records or the AMA records, the actual cutting of information per call that the system is processing. What you can see in this system here is that we are tracking the total number of calls for this time period at roughly 3.9 million call records analyzed. You can see that we have the minutes of use summation of all the calls being processed at 4.3 million minutes of use. You can see over the time frame the actual spike of the calls coming in on that periodic basis. The analysis can pinpoint domestic versus international destination of the calls, also analyzing the disconnect causes of the calls themselves, and then categorizing them as completed calls, not completed calls left and ringing, busy signal, not completed calls, and then other calls sent to treatment and not completed too. We can then start to look at the analysis based upon the trunk group data, and you can do this as incoming and outgoing trunk groups. And then what you see on the side here is we have true and false, and that true and false is whether it was actual completed answered call or a non-answered call. So you can start analyzing that your 0262 trunk group had a 70% amount of calls that were not answered, on the incoming side. And you can then kind of analyze each and every one of your trunk groups, seeing how many, what's the ratio of completed to non-completed or non-answered calls. Where in the 0190, about 54% were not answered. And then on the outgoing basis, for the outgoing trunk groups, you can see that the 0512 trunk group had 75% of their calls actually answered. So this gets you just so far that you can see how busy each trunk group was for the total number of calls made on them, and see which ones are actually making completed calls versus not completed calls, the time of the day, and start looking at a little bit higher level of what's going on in your traffic. On the next chart, we're actually going to take and kind of put that incoming and outgoing trunk group together, because you can see on that previous chart where the busiest incoming and busiest outgoing trunk groups, but where is your traffic really going? And when you convert it into a heat map using the analytics, you can now process and see and do the counts of the calls that are coming incoming and then outgoing another trunk. So we do see our 0226 trunk group again that has quite a bit of call volume going in, and it's actually going out 0322. The next highest one is the trunk group 0101, and it's actually going out 0227. So that's where you want to focus. You do see a lot of data on the previous one about the number of answered calls versus not answered calls, but if you're really trying to build your routing tables and understand where your traffic is coming in and going out, you can analyze it using a heat map. Here in this dashboard, we're going to review trunk group information from a C20. In this one here, you see we have the data of the trunk group utilization. And what we're doing is a bubble chart of the trunk groups within the system into three categories. Red is if the utilization has hit 90% or above. Yellow, 80 to 90%. And green, 80% or less. So we use this as the control mechanism of managing the rest of the data as we dive into each individual trunk group. Up at the top, you see which trunk group is the focus of our filters that we've applied to the other two charts. This chart here is defining the utilization over time of the trunk group, and the red areas are when the trunk group actually went into overflows. So you see the Ottawa trunk group, it overflows on March 2nd around 4, a couple times at 3 on March 3rd, and additional times on March 9th about 4. On the chart below, we can do an assessment based upon this trunk group, and we can see the red line is the in-service circuits, or essentially what the 100% utilization of that trunk group. So at 935 circuits is where that trunk group was 100% full. If you want to run that trunk group at 100% utilization over time, you would follow the green graph. Green line gives you the view over time of the point that the trunk group would be run at 100% utilization. Okay? If you want to run the trunk group at an 80% utilization, then you would run to the peak of the yellow graph. So in this case here, we would want to rebuild this trunk group at 1100 circuits, and that would give us a 20% utilization or 20% overage capacity in the trunk group based upon the period assessment defined within this graph. In this dashboard, we're assessing the quality of service of your calls processed through the SBCs. Here, you have various elements in the dashboard showing items of just general how many calls we're processing through the period, what the average ingress and egress MOS scores were. We are tracking in various ranges from minus or below 3.6, between 3.6 and 4.0, 4.0 to 4.3, and greater than 4.3, for the MOS scores and tracking the trends of those ranges of the calls. So you can see where the quality of your calls are varying based within the various ranges from great calls to bad calls. Also within here, we're looking at tracking the ingress and the egress percent of calls that are lower than 4.3. So you establish the 4.3 as your threshold of where you want to see your calls, and then you can see in this graph here that your SBC1 is tracking about 55% of their calls are lower than 4.3, where SBC2 has 100% of the calls over 4.3. So there's obviously a quality issue with your SBC1 that needs to be investigated. Other quick elements that we're also tracking here in case of packet loss that's greater than 4% for your ingress and your egress calls. This dashboard gives you a quick overview of the quality of service going on within your system at a quick glance. Here we're reviewing the dashboard for the top calling number analysis. This is data from the C20 AMA records, which are the call detail records generated by the C20. There are 4 charts here, and each one of them looking at a sorted list for the top busiest calling numbers. You will see some variations in the list between the middle 2 column charts and the outside charts. This is due to removing calls that have no duration in the analysis for the middle charts, but it still covers the same list of top 20 callers. We can see that the first number does map together, and all those calls going for the calls, there's only a 14-second average call duration. When we look at the next call down, the 895, it's dropped a little bit because you remove all the zero duration calls, but it still only has an 18-second average call duration. Okay, very low number. And then if you look at that third one that came up on the volume here, it also correlates to a 45-second call duration. So there's a little bit longer calls happening with this one versus the 13 and the 18-second call duration. And you see that kind of progressing through the system. When we start to now look at the next column, the next chart, and that's focusing on how many distinct numbers was that caller making in this time frame. So again, we look at the first one, the same 59 number. He was calling 582 different distinct dialed numbers in this. So there was obviously a lot of different called numbers going through the system. Over 70% of them were not being answered, and any of them that were was only a 14-second average hold time. Okay, so it's a lot of calls going out of the system, going to various different numbers that they're trying to dial out. Okay, when we look at that second number, it maps down here. It's now number 5, but they called 264 different distinct numbers. And then when you look at number 9,000, or number 3 over here, that correlates to 486 different numbers being called. Now this analysis is looking at about an hour's worth of time frame. And you see here that in that hour, these 3 top calling numbers that we're kind of assessing are calling over 264, over 400, and then over 500 different distinct numbers. I mean, clearly these are automated dials going out of those systems, making calls out to a bunch of different numbers going out there. Also, we know that they had very small call durations, 18 seconds, 14 seconds, and number 9,000, which was 45 seconds. Okay? So the next level then is obviously these are automated calls going out of the system, calling out multiple peoples at a time based upon this data. As we're kind of following through it, you can see that these may be fraudulent calls. They may be service numbers calling out for whether there's an emergency in the town, maybe it's a school issue, or it could even be political-based calls leaving a message for people. Okay? So the next step we try to look at is where are these numbers actually dialing out. Here we can see that they're dialing out mostly to domestic numbers. The next one down is also still domestic numbers, but now if you jump into our number 9,000 calling number, now we see here that 88% of his calls are going international. So this would be one that you would take as a high priority to investigate, since there is a bunch of different calls going out, 486 different dialed numbers going out of the system. It is out of about a 45-second call duration, and they are targeting international numbers. So those three numbers there would be key candidates for further investigation into a fraud analysis, just based upon looking at some very basic characteristics of the calling pattern they're making over that last hour's period. Again, we looked at total volume, what the actual completion indicator was, not completed. There's a high amount of not completed calls, just went to ringing. We looked at the average duration, very short duration calls. And we also looked at the number of distinct dialed numbers that they were making. That's a huge indication that it is an auto dialer. And it could just be a call center making out calls for outbound calls. So it's one thing to investigate, understand your accounts within your system itself. Now, the one that would be looking for further investigation is the one going out to international, because that is a higher cost type of call going out of the system. So this would conclude then that you would have a assessment looked at the numbers and make use further investigations into these dialed numbers. Great. I hope, I know some of the images may have been small in there because I saw some comments on that. So if there's any questions on the demos I walked through, if you couldn't tell, pre-recorded, go ahead, feel free to ask any of them here, or if there's some side questions or other interests. What we are just showing you is kind of a taste of some of the dashboards and information that can happen. And all of those use cases were done in the same system, providing all the details, pulling in SMMT, oh my gosh, event data, pulling in AMA records, pulling in SBC CDRs and QoS stats. So doing all the evaluations, looking at your equipment level, the network itself, even at the call level side, being able to provide you information on your, being able to, what you want to do with your trunk, your traffic, and your network itself. Okay, next slide. Also, I mean, we did use one looking at the calling areas that does give you some insight even to scan for security, fraud analysis, or just bad traffic you don't want on your network. So when you are kind of looking at and trying to grab some of the analytics into your network to give you some of the insights, some of the three priorities you're trying to do is visibility, agility, and then the automation. The visibility, you need to have that huge level of data being collected, but also being able to simplify the data to make it usable in the sense over large networks, over many elements, and just the amount of data each of these elements put out there. Okay, that allows you to even drill down to the integral level of what was going on versus the big picture, or even just look at the big picture. On the agility side, right, you need to be able to pull in this information quickly. The processing of it needs to happen quickly and allow you to adjust the views that you're looking at, the charts you're looking at, and the analysis you're doing. As many of you know, we had huge, massive changes in traffic just in the Q1 and Q2 of this year based upon what was going on in the world. That caused a lot of adjustments for networks that had to be done on very short order. So having analytics tools could have made those adjustments quicker, easier, and better adapted, or a lot more information when you made those changes into it. Then on the other side of this is the automation aspect. This is where you need that system automation that lets you do everything just from basic alerts and finding issues in the network for you, to even being able to push, in some cases, allowing these automation systems to make changes directly on your network without human interaction. And that could be anything of changing routing schemes, changing CAC levels on trunks, or even sending calls to some sort of disconnect reason because you're trying to manage your traffic, or even sending them to announcements, right? That level is what you really need to look at, these 3 priorities for an analytics engine to help you manage your network more efficiently. Okay, Mr. Todd?
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, really those keys and visibility, agility, and automation, it's a lot, and it's definitely where we all want to be. And the question is, how do we really get there? What's the details behind it? So if we can go to the next slide, Prasanna, thank you. The visibility, first and foremost with Ribbon Analytics, the first thing we're going to try to do is look across all access types. So whether it's wireless, whether it's fixed, true fixed voice, true wireless access, both VoLTE, for example, voice, and actual data, whether it's internet or app-based content. We're looking across all networks and all content on those networks. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, that's a lot of data. There's a lot of things that we're pulling in. And really the key solution within Ribbon Analytics is the ability to cull that data and find the content that is critical to addressing the use cases that are being implemented. So to your point earlier, we can look at things like operations or security, and by identifying the use cases that we want to really go after, that allows us to target the data coming from the left-hand side of the screen. The analytics solution, as you said, has to have massive scalability, and at the same time, we have to have incredible flexibility, because we're going to be dealing with a number of systems, a number of different access types, a number of different types of networks. So what we've done is built a very scalable, very adaptable solution that allows us to call the data and select the data that is of most interest so that we can actually address the use cases. Once we've done that, we can now start to create much more intelligent KPIs that allow us to describe exactly what's happening on the network. So the first stage is just describing what we see. So we're starting with descriptive analytics. We would move then into more predictive analytics, implementing things like machine learning that allow us to do things like, resource utilization estimations. And finally, the last piece is what you were just referring to in automation, is the prescriptive component. So when we move all the way to the right-hand side, it can be something as simple as an alert, something that tells us, hey, this is something you really should go look at. We saw examples of that in the videos you were just showing us. And this, ideally can even be sped up. It's something that we're hoping to empower support engineers and support personnel so that they can, more rapidly address these, issues, whether they're hard issues or soft issues on the network, and allows them to come to a resolution much more rapidly. All of this is really about making both the network and the people that run the network much more efficient. And whether you're implementing something like a new policy, a new rule, as you were just mentioning, that allows the network itself to be more efficient, or if we're doing something to empower the engineers that are running the network to be more efficient. It's all about that. And really the point there is an efficient network is a happy network. It scales much better, and the systems that run the network end up being much more functional and much more capable. We can move on to the next slide, Prasanna. So why Ribbon? And really a big piece of this is that end-to-end visibility that we've touched on a few times. It's quite important to be able to have that view across multiple access types, multiple communication types, whether it's data or fixed voice or wireless data, wireless voice. It's really important to be able to pull the picture together completely across all access types and all types of communication. Secondly, it's a single pane of glass. So this is allowing us to look across, everything at the same time, even the ability to tie users so that we actually can see how they perform based on where they actually are making a living. And really, another key component is a lot of this is out of the box. There are analytics engagements out there that are very, very heavy into the professional services side of things. Our goal here as Apply is to actually provide you guys with hundreds of use cases out of the box that, as Rich was walking you through in the videos, provide solutions that are usable absolutely today. On top of that, we can, of course, continue to customize and build around what you need and what your network is actually delivering to the customers and what's important to you and your SLAs. But obviously, you have to start with the out-of-the-box use cases and the ability to consume the data that's available on the network today. And finally, Ribbon brings decades of telecom SME to this analytics function. In other words, we understand how the communications actually builds from the ground up. So as we're bringing in data scientists and looking at the data and crunching the data to find what's important, we actually know what we're really looking for from a RTC, from a fixed voice, from a wireless voice, from an internet app, or data type of communication. We know what we're looking for in order to provide the best possible experience across all that. So the SME component of Ribbon's background is critical to providing a very powerful analytics solution. So Prasanna, with that, I'll hand back over to you.
Hey, Todd, thank you. I believe we are at the end of the presentation, and we do have a lot of content for you guys, but before we close it off, we have quite a lot of Q&A and we have some time. So I will ask a few questions, and Todd and Rich, feel free to pitch in and answer away. So the first question was, can I customize the dashboards to send to, let's say, execs or to send out to customers?
Sure. So I'll kind of take that one. So all those dashboards you saw in the videos, those charts within them, any of those dashboards can be incorporated into scheduled reports. They can be sent out as alerts or emails, and those emails can then be sent out to groups or whomever in your organization. The other side of that is the dashboards are all basic UI, click and drop kind of selection that allows you to add the different data sources, set the different settings, and the time frame. So it's really easy to use, infinitely expandable, and being able to add new data and more data to it. Okay.
Perfect. And we just got another question. So do the various network elements need to be ribbon, or it's or it's system vendor agnostic?
Yeah, so the examples we did today are historic ribbon applications, but we do support essentially a parsing capability to add new information and new devices in there. We do support third-party devices such as other app servers. We've also support other SBC types and other even PBX levels. Everything we do on that is based upon a customer engagement and then an integration effort driven. Some of that stuff can be done pretty quickly within, say, a month, and then other efforts may take 2 to 3 months to kind of drive. In one particular, I think on the questionnaire is analyzing and show SOC usage in gateway controller fills. So that is all based upon the data we're pulling out of it and looking at the different information coming in. Most of what you saw there was PM-based data, but we can also reach out and pull other types of information relating to the SOCs, which is your license usage information. So that is stuff that can be built out as a part of the system dashboards.
Yeah, following up to that, there's another question was, what kind of KPI reports can we extract and send?
So from the KPI reports, so as the Ribbon Analytics system itself, we have a concept that we call add-ons. And the add-ons essentially are plugins that allow us to pull more information, as in KPIs, data sets, dashboards, or other elements that add more applications, more devices, or just different views of the information in there. We're constantly adding more and building library of different add-ons available. So that gives us the view. So the KPI sets, for example, I think we have 2 or 3 add-ons of just SBC KPI sets dealing anything from QoS to bandwidth monitoring to international traffic assessments on where the traffic's being sent and going. And then these add-ons can be defined based upon device levels or just applications themselves.
Perfect. So one last question is, can we forecast capacity needs in fixed networks with C20?
Oh, great question. So we didn't have it in the demo here, but we have a proof of concept capability out now that we can use that uses machine learning to look at our historical data and then build forecasting models that you can assess at a gateway level or a trunk group level or a data set level that you kind of process into it, and can show you that if you ever seen some of the projections and where it has kind of the fuzzy line giving you that score of confidence level of where that traffic is going to be based upon the historical view. And then you can do analysis and look at what-if scenarios by changing some of the data variables, or even look for anomalous behaviors that based upon some of the old past traffic. So those type of capacity planning tools are just right around the corner, and we're actually working into trials now.
Awesome. So that's all the questions I had that I wanted to highlight here and have a discussion. Any final thoughts or words to add here, Rich, Todd?
I'll start with Todd. I mean, if you want to learn more about it, all these demos that you've seen, I can produce them and we can run those live. Please reach out to your sales staff, or if there's some particular use cases that you're interested in, just reach out to your sales team and we can definitely sit down and work through those, whether it's defining the KPI sets, defining the data sources, or just the views of the graphs. So all that stuff is available to help essentially drive utilization and efficiencies into your network. Todd?
Yeah, and Prasanna, I would probably just follow up and say, obviously, we're just scratching the surface of the power of ribbon analytics on this particular presentation. If there's anything else of interest as well, wireless side or further into the data side, as Rich said, please reach out to your sales teams, and we'll be happy to talk more about it.
All right. Appreciate for all of your time. Lance, back to you.
Thanks, Prasanna. Thanks, Rich and Todd, and thank you all for attending. In a few moments, we'll end the webinar. I did want to thank you all for attending today and asking your questions. We will send a follow-up email with a link to this replay that'll likely be later in the afternoon, potentially in the morning, but you'll get a link to this replay. And also, if you'd like to have the slides, you can respond and we'll give you the PDF of the slides, and you can get those links to all the documents that we have listed on your screen now. And you can also still get to those right now if you click the documents icon. You can see those there to take. Again, thank you for your time. We do appreciate you all attending and being a participant in these types of events. Please check your inbox for follow-up. And as always, you can find us on ribboncommunications.com. Plenty of ways to contact us there if you have any questions that come up afterwards. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.